Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina Ingram, and I'm really excited to be here at the AI for IA conference to share a little bit about the work that I'm doing in the realm of trust and automation bias. So just to give you a bit of context about my background, I run a social enterprise called Ethically Aligned AI, and we help organizations to build and deploy better, more trustworthy, more responsible AI systems. And as part of my work, I am part of many global communities. And one of those communities is a group called For Humanity, and they're a not-for-profit based out of the US. And they're really leading the charge on creating audit criteria for AI and autonomous and automated systems. And we've been spending quite a bit of time on this topic of automation bias. So I'd like to start out with just explaining a bit about what is automation bias. Automation bias is the propensity to trust or even favor a decision made by an automated system, even when there is contradictory evidence. So essentially, it's about the ways in which we tend to overtrust machines. I have a couple of examples of how this happens. So one of the stories that you've probably seen in the past couple of years is about people who have followed their GPS system and they've driven into a lake or off into the dock and into the ocean. And there's many cases like this that have been reported. And I'm sure you might have wondered, as I have, how exactly does this happen? Didn't they see that body of water? Didn't they notice what was going on? But that's the thing about automation bias. It can make us so focused on our technology that we actually exclude other important sources of information. Another example is when we use tools in the context of our work to automate aspects of our job. And this is what happened in Australia during the robo-debt scandal. So an automated system flagged thousands of people because the system thought these people had overpaid their welfare benefits, or they'd been overpaid in welfare benefits. And now they owed the government all of this money. So the system generated thousands of letters and it automatically sent these out to collect the debt. But the system was actually wrong. So imagine getting a letter like this saying that you owe all of this money. It would be incredibly stressful. And that's what happened to over 400,000 people who got these letters. And the whole situation blew up. It was in the media. It led to a big scandal. And the Australian government suffered a lot of reputational damage and a huge breach of public trust. So that's a little bit about automation bias. I want to bring this back to AI, and things are moving really quickly. We're automating more and more things, and this is really why we need to care about these issues. It's no longer about isolated technologies like a GPS system or a government piece of software. Increasingly, what we're seeing is AI is being woven into everything. So if we think about things like generative AI, it's in all of our enterprise tools, it's in search engines, it's in all the tools that we're using to, I don't know, maintain our websites, use for editing photos and so forth. So we really need to think about this issue more because it is an issue that is becoming more and more prevalent. So that's a little bit about automation bias. You can get a flavor of where that is going. I want to turn a little bit now and talk about trust. So when we think about trust, we need to have it in order to navigate a really complex world. We need to be able to trust people and things in our environment. And these are just some everyday scenarios: sitting in a chair, going in an elevator, using a calculator, getting a recommendation from a friend. These are all the kinds of things that happen on a regular basis in our lives. And we can ask ourselves, why do we trust these everyday scenarios? So there's many reasons why. Trust is kind of this multifaceted thing, but if we think about these and we kind of logically work through them, we can think, for example, in the case of a chair, that our subconscious mind knows that there's a system of product regulation and safety and standards that's in place. We couldn't actually be using this chair. It couldn't be sold in our country without that system. And that also applies to things like elevators. And that's the reason we can get into an elevator very comfortably and be carried very far, many stories into the air in a little metal box. Now, when it comes to our friend's book recommendation, There's also this issue of intent. So friends tend to have our best intentions in mind. They're not really getting kickbacks on their recommendations, at least we hope not. And this might extend to this idea of intention to other trusted sources of information, such as credible journalists. So in this case, journalistic incentives are aligned with our incentives as well, because delivering the truth for them is very important. They have professional codes of conduct. They have other mechanisms like laws against slander or misrepresentation. So all of those things align with the public good. And in the case of the calculator, it doesn't have any intent, which is actually a good thing in this case. In the case of a calculator, we're talking about a technology that's reliable. It's been around for a long time, and it's explainable. So if you really want to know how a calculator works, you can get an explanation about circuits and electrical chips and binary and logic gates, and you can really delve into the mechanisms behind a calculator. So these are not all the reasons that we trust things, but they're examples of how trust works in the world and why we find certain things trustworthy. Now, if we go back to thinking about AI and automated tools, in many cases, they are not backed by these same types of trust mechanisms. So they actually lack an infrastructure of trust. We don't have regulations or safety standards. In a lot of cases, the incentive structures are not only not aligned with our best interests, they're actively misaligned. So many of these recommendation systems actually do get a kickback when they make recommendations to us. And they don't have a very long history. They're pretty new in the grand scheme of things. And in a lot of cases, they're very opaque. We don't really understand exactly how they work. So we can ask ourselves, what exactly is going on here? We trust these automated tools, over rely on them, and yet they lack the basic mechanisms for our trust criteria. So why do we trust them? Well, these are just a few factors that can engender our trust in automated tools. So technology itself is often presented as being neutral or objective. So we don't stop to consider the built-in biases or the ways in which these tools might be inaccurate or lead us down harmful paths. And these tools are often really convenient to use, so they can make our lives easier, but we don't always see the cost of this convenience. These tools can seemingly help us deal with complexity. So in a complex world, we're looking for ways to help us navigate through a whole range of problems and challenges and decisions. And these tools are marketed as ways to help us deal with all of those complex issues. And the way these tools are designed can also lead us to over-rely on them, even to the point of addiction. And this is because there can be incentives for organizations who build and market these tools to keep you hooked. So their incentives, again, are not aligning with your goals. All right, so I want to mix all these examples together, and I want to consider this admittedly rather absurd example of a cupcake recipe generated by an automated system. So because there's no safeguards here to ensure the product does not deliver harm or questionable outcomes, we have no history of explainability to outline why these ingredients were selected by our automated system. And there's no intention by the system to provide a reliable recommendation. And maybe we could even speculate, there could be some misaligned incentives here. It looks like there might be some kind of product placement going on with Fancy Feast. So this is the kind of recommendation that we can get. So hopefully common sense is going to override this and will tip us off that chocolate chips, cat food, and onions are not a good combination for uberlicious cupcakes. But common sense is a starting point. It doesn't necessarily always work, though, because while this example seems very obvious, if we're in a domain where we don't actually know very much about the situation, it might be really hard to spot what exactly has gone wrong. So this is why we should be more skeptical in general about AI and automated systems and not blindly trust them. So just to give you another example, while I was scripting the audio for this lesson, I got some autocorrect and it tried to anticipate what I might want to say. So it probabilistically calculated that I might want to say the word accordance after the phrase "they acted in." And I decided that wasn't the words I wanted to use, so I kept going with my own version of the sentence. Now, nobody would have been harmed if I phrased my sentence differently. You wouldn't have even known that I did that. But that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I talk about pushing back a little bit on these systems and not necessarily just following them down every path. So going back to our infrastructure of trust criteria, We can be more skeptical about automated systems when they don't meet these basic trust criteria. So we can ask ourselves, is the system subject to oversight through standards and regulation? Is it aligned with our best interests? Is it proven? Is it reliable? Is it explainable? And until we have these kinds of trust criteria, we should really question the trustworthiness of automated systems and not succumb to automation bias. So that's all for this very short talk on automation bias and trust. I look forward to seeing you all at the AI for IA conference and having more discussions about this topic.